This video is not intended for children.
Hello everyone. Our topic this week was requested by James Threat 1. We'll be making wheat bread in a real kitchen and everything.
So, as always, first things first. We're going to go over how to do two kinds of wheat bread. Your basic wheat bread and your Living Yeast / sourdough start wheat bread. The steps are identical, so we're just going to start with the normal bread and go from there. Your basic wheat bread requires 5 or 6 things: wheat flour, yeast, water, salt, and some kind of sweetener. The recipe we will be using today will call for about 6 cups of wheat flour, 1 tablespoon, or 1 package of your generic active dry yeast, 2 1/4 cups water, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 1.5 to 2 tablespoons of sweetener. We are using honey as our sugary agent today, because delicious. The purpose of the water, flour, and yeast should be obvious. The sweetener helps feed the yeast to enable the rising and leavening later on, and the salt acts as both a flavoring agent and a preservative, i.e. helps prevent mold and such from forming before you can nom all your bread. As a last optional ingredient, we're going to add 2 tablespoons of fat, in our case coconut oil. This isn't required, but it helps with the softness of the finished product and may help reduce surface stickage throughout the baking process. When it's all said and done, this recipe will make about 2 loaves of bread, or a loaf and a dozen rolls, or a loaf and a few breadsticks, or you get it.
To start with, pour your 2 1/4 cups of water into a decent-sized bowl. The water should be warm. Exact temperature will vary depending upon who you ask, but you want it to be in roughly the 105 to 110 degrees range to start with. For the more organic cooks amongst us, it should be warm. If you pour some water on your palm or wrist and it's warm, it's good. If it feels cold, it won't activate the yeast, and if it feels hot, it will kill the yeast off. Slightly warmer temperatures are usually recommended for your basic store-bought yeast, but that being said, feel free to err a little on the side of warmer than colder, because the first thing we're going to do is throw all of the 1.5 to 2 tablespoons of sugar or honey and the 1 teaspoon of salt into the water and stir it up until they both dissolve. The chemistry of salt dissolving in water will cool the water a little, which is why you want it to be warm to start with.
Once the salt and sweetener have dissolved, add your 1 package / 1 tablespoon of yeast to the salty, sugary water and let it sit for 5 minutes. Don't stir. First, the yeast will soften on the surface of the water, and then you will begin to see small poofy bubbles growing. This process is called proofing the yeast. The purpose of proofing is to ensure that the yeast is still good. If you're working with old yeast, even outdated yeast, you can proof it with this process. If the yeast does the bubbly thing, then it'll work fine for your bread. If it doesn't, you need better yeast. Or possibly warmer water, assuming you erred on the side of cold earlier.
Once 5 minutes have passed, add about half or 3-ish cups of your wheat flour to the bowl and stir to combine. If you're using a fat like we are, add it now. If you're using an electric stand mixer with a dough hook, and if you have the option and don't hate yourself, please use an electric mixer, you can let this mixing process extend over the course of several minutes, as it will do some of the requisite kneading for you ahead of the kneading stage. If you're doing this all by hand, it's easier just to knead things all at once later on. Either way, once that's been mixed thoroughly, add the rest of the flour 1 cup at a time, allowing it to fully incorporate each time before adding more. This is where the ish part in the flour measurement comes. It can sometimes be finicky, and less or more may be required from batch to batch. You want the dough to start adhering to your stirring device and pulling away from the sides of the bowl as one solid mass.
Once enough flour has been incorporated such that the dough is behaving appropriately, we've arrived at the kneading stage. If you're using an electric mixer, leave the dough on the dough hook, turn it on, and just let the dough beat itself up for about 4 to 5 minutes. Don't walk away, the mixing process is violent, and you may need to hold your mixer down. If you're doing this by hand, lightly flour your work surface, then knead the dough for about 10 minutes. And we really do mean 10 minutes. It's a long time. It's 1/3 of a half-hour show, guys. The purpose of kneading is to stretch and link the gluten protein strands in your dough. This is what allows the bread to catch the air and CO2 emissions created by the rising process, which is what actually lets the bread rise. As you're kneading the bread, no matter your method, the dough will eventually become stretchy, stretching into a shape and springing back a bit. Most recipes call this the smooth and elastic stage. Ooh, sexy. This means you're done kneading and you can move on to the next step. So if you're using an electric mixer, take some plastic wrap and grease it, butter, oil, cooking spray, the fat you mixed into the bread, whatever you want, and wrap it around the top of your bowl. You don't even have to take it out of the dough hook or anything. If you're doing things by hand, grease your bowl before placing the dough into the bowl, then grease some plastic wrap and cover the opening of your bowl entirely. 2 quick notes. You can substitute a damp cloth instead of the plastic wrap if you would prefer. The general idea is that you just don't want your dough to dry out. Also, if you used a fat in your bread, you don't have to be quite as generous with the greasing of your bowl and the bowl topper. Once your bowl has been covered, let the dough sit 1.5 to 2 hours, depending upon room temperature, longer for colder environments, shorter for warmer, or until the dough has roughly doubled in size.
Been achieved, test the rising of your dough. If you poke a finger into it and the dough is done, it should leave a hole. If it springs back, you're not done yet, wait a little longer. Now, we're going to knead it a little bit more. If you're using an electric mixer, just let it spin until the dough collapses. If you're doing this by hand, punch the dough down and knead it together within the bowl. Either way, it should reduce to a lump just a little bit bigger than what you started with a couple hours ago. Now, we'll divide and shape our bread into our 2 desired loaves. Grease your baking containers, cover said containers exactly like you did when you let the dough rise in the bowl earlier. In fact, you can even use the same stuff if you saved it. And then we're going to let the dough rise once more. Wait 30 to 40 minutes, or about half of the previous rise time, or until the dough has once again doubled in size. It's important to try and avoid letting the dough rise too long, as it can collapse, and at this point, yeah, it's just going to leave you with less lifty bread. It's still edible though, no reason to waste your dough. While waiting this time, preheat your oven to 350 degrees. Bread loaves will bake for about 25 to 30 minutes, rolls and breadsticks will be closer to 20. Once fully baked, remove your bread from the oven, let sit for about 10 minutes for ease of removal from your baking dish, and then either leave the loaves covered while cooling for a softer crust, or leave them uncovered for a crunchier crust. Either way though, cover to prevent drying once you've cut into your new loaf for the first time.
That's your basic wheat bread. Wheat bread made with living yeast or a sourdough start uses almost identical ingredients and the steps are almost exactly the same. The only difference in ingredients is that instead of some packaged dry yeast, you'll use your sourdough starter. But everything else, sugar, water, optional fat, all goes in exactly the same way. As far as actually making the bread goes, all of the steps are also exactly the same. The only things that change are you'll need a little less water because there's already water in your starter, your kneading time will generally be a little less, and your rising time will increase dramatically. It's going to take something like 3 to 4 times longer. So when you're letting your dough rise for the first time, it'll be something like 5 to 8 hours to wait instead of 1.5 to 2, and the second rise will take something like 1.5 to 2 hours instead of 30 to 40 minutes. Though cook times will remain the same, about 25 to 30 minutes for a loaf of bread at 350 degrees. So you might be asking, why take all the extra time to make basically the same thing? There are a few reasons, but one of the most widespread reasons for using living yeast sourdough starter over basic dry yeast is the living sourdough yeast starter does a better job of breaking down wheat grain skins, which are designed to keep things out so that the wheat grain has a chance to grow into a new plant without being eaten by something. Essentially, it does more of the digestive process for you before even baking.
For people with gluten tolerance issues, this means that the bread made with the sourdough starters may be easier for them to eat.
Additionally, so long as you feed the starter, it remains reusable and can be used to make infinite bread loaves over the course of your lifetime. And maybe some other people you share it with.
And that's basically wheat bread. Delicious brown bread, superior to white bread in almost every way, don't at me, internet. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave us a like and maybe share it with someone you know might like it. If you have ideas for videos you'd like to see us do in the future, do like James Threat 1 and let us know in the comments down below. If you'd like to see more videos from us in the future, be they lore, let's play, or other, go ahead and hit that subscribe button.
In the meantime, this has been True Masters and Morons, signing off. By the way, internet, you don't have to at him. White bread is better. Dun, dun. Thanks for watching this video. If you'd like to see more like it, hit that subscribe orb.
To see our last Let's Play, click or tap the link on the right.
For our last lore video, click the link on the left.
Thank you to all of our patrons for making these videos possible.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.